As every day with our territorial acknowledgement, we would like to begin acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is the land traditionally of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. News reports up at the region were reminded of how long and deep those traditions go, including under Fisher-Hallman Road in South Kitchener. And I'm also to lead a moment of reflection. At the beginning of this council meeting, we pause to think about the needs of the community. May we show wisdom and compassion in all our decisions. Look to council for disclosure of pecuniary us into council workshop 2020-2022 budget process debrief. Philippa and Brad will tell us what's what, and we'll tell them what's where and what's going where next. I think that's how this works.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Good afternoon, Council, senior management staff, and citizens. Brad and I will be taking you through a debrief regarding this 3-year budget that you just approved in terms of the process itself. And Brad will be running our polling software to make sure that all of your votes are recorded. Oh. Okay, so just a little bit of a reflection on the 2019 budget, which is the one obviously just a year ago. We had a survey in this budget as well as some of these here, including today. We'll be showing you some clips of the documents that were used just as a quick refresher for you so that you can visualize them. And we'll also be talking about council meetings, the number of them, their pace, that type of thing. Promotion efforts, we will also show some visuals for you. And then at the very end, we will open it up to any other questions that council may have or feedback that they may have on the process so that we can improve it for the next one. So during the various that with your budget process, there was some feedback that was already provided more informally during those meetings. So we have taken note of those. Those that are of a more operational nature, initiatives, aligning those with our infrastructure renewal. So those are just a few, but certainly there were many more that members of council did identify throughout the process. But today is another opportunity for you to raise those concerns or questions, feedback to us as well. So moving on to our first question, which will be coming in a moment, we're going to flip to our website. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, the intention of this was really to provide people an understanding of the different dates and documents regarding the budget that council navigates through, and hopefully give them enough information to decide what would be relevant for them and how to sequence their review of the budget. So this was the visual roadmap that we prepared. And I think back to Brad so that he can actually poll you and ask the question.
So through Chair Henry, so as we get to each polling slide, I'll the question, and then we'll open the poll, and I'll be able to just track response. So first is new patient valuable. Please vote now. So I'm looking for one more response. So there's one that didn't come through. We have 6. We should have 7. So maybe you could re-enter your poll if you don't think it was registered.
Okay, so thank you for that. Now we'd like to open it up for more verbal feedback on what you think was useful or not useful, or what we could do differently with regard to the visual. It up to count for verbal feedback.
Any thoughts to share, Council Bonnecourt?
Through you, Chair Henry, I thought this was a really helpful document just to help people navigate. One thing I was wondering is whether it could be kind of broken up into chunks that could be easily shared on social media. Just because, you know, if people don't happen to come across the document in a facility or they don't know that it exists online, how can we help people kind of just fall across it? That might be something that I'd be looking for.
Thank you.
No, I think that's that kind of walk documents. I know we had a communication strategy through Tony's group, but also Keshwar and others on the finance staff trying to do that, breaking those apart into retweetable or repostable bites. I think is how a lot of people navigate. So that's really helpful feedback. Other thoughts?
Through you, Henry, just on the get involved section, which lists sort of all of the key dates when business plans are being presented to council, et cetera, et cetera. There's a comment about encouraging residents to come out to meetings, which would be awesome. But perhaps we should be putting a link to where they could watch the council meetings to let them know that they could watch from home as opposed to having to come all the way out here if that's the hurdle for some people. Other than that, I thought this document worked well.
Any other feedback?
Thank you.
Not seeing any. I think we'll speak as they need to. We can move on to the next one.
Okay, so next is the budget in brief. So there were mixed reactions last year with, I don't know what happened there. Oh, thank you. No, that's okay, Kevin. Go ahead. That's okay, because I can go in while I'm chatting. There were mixed reactions to the budget in brief last year, which was our first foray into doing that. I'm just trying to get my cursor up. And so we heard council there, and this time around we reduced the size by about half. So it is about 7 pages long, and tries to give residents an understanding of how the proposed taxes would impact them in terms of the dollar amounts, sort of the process, efficiencies, and then it goes into operating and capital budget, some of the highlights, as well as finally a comparison in the region. So this is really the approach we took, a slimmer version, looking for your feedback there. And so I'm going to pass it over to Brad to do a similar poll and then followed by verbal feedback.
So the budget in brief, still a relatively new publication. Was it valuable? Please vote now.
Any comments for team on that one from council? Councilor Hanmer? Thumbs up.
Sorry,
from
as I move everything, move it moving around here. This document I really did like. It was much better in a shorter version, and I used it a lot with residents if they just needed a little bit of information. I also liked that it started to sensitize the residents to the strategic plan and the pillars. So beginning to make that link, it's going to take a while for us to get it there, but I thought that was a good way to do it. And everybody likes a pie chart, so that one was really helpful.
Thank you.
I do like pie charts. I'm not always sure if I'm partial to. Councillor Bodley?
I just want to point out that this is the one chart where the roads is most prevalent, and so going back to the commentary about possibly shifting the verbiage of how we identify what roads are versus active transportation versus underground work, this is the one where it's pretty stark. 30% of the capital budget is going towards roads, and so on an initial, for what this is, a budget in brief, it looks like we spend a third of our money on roads and not anything on active transportation. So just want to highlight that.
Other thoughts here, Council? I'll say yes. I think making the budget in brief briefer, but the amount of information that needed to be included, you still made it, and I think that was incredible, especially given relative to 2019. There was 3 times as many budgets to really include in all of this, and you did a really good job in consolidating that. I think the expressing some things in averages while also breaking them out was helpful, because it's difficult to have 3 conversations. It allowed you to have sort of one overarching conversation and not get hung up in any one year, but able to say something quick and tweetable about what it is that we had without getting bogged down in 15 numbers to say it. So that was really good. Seeing nothing further here, we'll move on to number 3.
Thank you. Yes, so the next question is around business plans. I'm going to navigate to the website here as well, a little bit more within the business plans in terms of the reference numbers. So I'm going to just go to Environment and Parks as an example here to show you what it looks like, and just as a quick refresher then. Capital. Okay, so I'm going to pass it back to Brad here for the polling question.
And then look at the actual budget sheets, both on the operating and the capital side. And I think that informed a lot of my questions at the time that the business plans came through. I really like the references in the business plan, just found it so helpful.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonnegar?
Through you, Chair Henry. I don't know if it was a change to the document or a change to my understanding of the process, but I certainly found this document more useful this time round than the first time that we went through the budget process. So whatever magic you put in the sauce, it was good. It was helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Hammer.
Thank you. I'll echo that. I found it very useful. I do have a suggestion, though. As reading through them, I did find that there was a difference in how some of them were completed, and so some of the business plans were easy to follow all of it, and some of them a little bit too long in what they were commenting on, and it didn't quite follow. So that's just first time going through the template. I agree, though, that this is is probably the key document that I spent a lot of time on.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair Henry. I also found it extremely helpful. The other thing that I would be interested in seeing a little bit more consistent is the connection to the strategic plan pillars, or if for some reason staff feel like there isn't a good connection to the strategic plan pillars, why it's still really important to the work of the city. So some more consistency and some more purposefulness behind how we're connecting the business plans to the strategic plan, if possible. But otherwise, it was a really great document.
Thank you.
Other feedback, Council? Councillor Veith.
Through you, Chair Henry, thank you. That I found it very useful too, and I find it's the one even from the last time I refer to again, like after budget, just sort of reminder and what's going on. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think to Councillor Vasek's point, and I know I've had this conversation with Ms. Patel, or her with me, I think is the direction of the conversation on this. It can be challenging for some divisions, finance in particular, and the corporate division in particular, that in order for anybody to do the stuff we need them to do, we have to have a foundational piece, and building a solid foundation for the organization doesn't get expressed in strategic pillars. That's not really community facing. And if we don't do it, we're screwed. And I think figuring out how to label that under a very rigid template for a strategic plan was something that they were trying to work through. And so I think even offline, if council has ideas for how to express that or how they're looking for it, I know Ms. Patel, Philippa would be very happy to hear that feedback, because it's something I know they struggled with. And I'd say for me, just on my own piece of feedback, as I think I said last year, and I didn't really use the business plans as they were. They felt more like communications tools rather than business plan tools that then were communicated. This one flipped it on its head, and it was actually the first place I went to in reviewing the budget rather than the operating book. I then went to the operating book to sort of cross-reference and check and see what was and wasn't captured and as I went through. But this is the first year that we've had these that I started there first. And that's because of the upgrades that staff worked so hard to make for this cycle. So I very much appreciate it. So moving on to the operating book, question 4.
Okay. So the operating budget book is right at the very top within this operating section. And the book itself had, just looking at my notes here, had 9 main sections. The memo, which, summarizes the budget from an operating perspective, mostly in words with a few tables. But you can think of this as sort of the operating budget in brief, if you will, that section of things. And then we get into the strat plan in terms of how the operating budget is investing in the key pillars and in more detail. And so you get all these specific budget requests that line up under each pillar. So through that lens, highlights, talking about the language so that people understand what we mean when we say certain things, and then higher level information about changes from year to year in different categories, and the household impact comparators, etc. So then we get into the tax-based side of the budget, and it's this sheet that you're probably quite familiar with that breaks down every single request, 3 years worth, and has all the relative reference numbers so that you can then go to the budget requests themselves and read more about what they're trying to accomplish there. And so then this is really repeated again for the enterprises in the different parts of the book. So hopefully that was a good refresher, and now I push it back to Brad for the actual poll.
So question 4, was the operating book effective? Please vote now.
Comments, council? Mayor Jaworski.
I found the book to be, very fulsome and good for answering questions or looking up facts or justifying our decisions or showing where we are in comparison to other places, and really as almost like a settling document of saying, that yes, this does justify this. Now I need to look at the details. But I spent much more of my time in the details, the line items, which I thought were very well done. So my only concern and why I voted somewhat is just because I think a ton of effort, and I could be wrong, goes into this document, but I used it more for justification rather than decision making. If that's helpful.
Councillor Bonnegar?
Thank you.
Through you, Chair Henry, I mean, those line items are where I spend most of my time going through the budget. Then I'm linking it back to things like the business plans and things like that. And while I understand that the information at the start is kind of part of the overall positioning of the budget, I don't really use that. So I'm sorry to whoever slaved over those pages, because I know it takes a lot of work. But from where I was sitting, there was kind of limited use to what I call like the supplementary materials. Having it by strategic pillar was useful, but it wasn't really essential for me.
Okay, thank you.
Other feedback, Council? I think that's sort of helpful. It is, as we think of, there are multiple different documents, and there's a roadmap that everybody can sort of, follow. And so there is a lot in the front matter that is a rehash if you follow the roadmap, but if this is the only one you pull, you get it. And so this is some of those hit people over the heads with as many sticks as you can to drill the message in that these are connected, they're lined up to the strategic pillars. But I'll echo Councillor Bonnegar's comments. For me, in terms of navigating it, there's a lot of different ways that the budget is sliced and packaged in the front matter. I'm guessing that one of those tables, like each of those tables, works best for someone. But it is doubtful that all of those tables are what everybody wants, and maybe that's just part of how you're putting a buffet of different tables for it, and somebody always goes for the crab meat, and somebody else always, I don't know. Whatever the heck else is happening at buffets these days, crowds of people doing things that you really don't want to be thinking about in this public health time. But for me, I don't use most of it. I end up in the schedules and the tables at the end. But from a facilitation, a budget day perspective, maybe it helps for me to orient my own head to what we're going to be doing on the day and to be thinking through that way, so I can feel best prepared to help council through it. Seeing no further feedback on question 4, question 5.
Thank you. Okay, so online materials with regard to operating. We were just there on the website. I'm going to just navigate back to it to remind you of what that looks like. So in this collapsible section, all of our operating documents are here. We started out with the book just now, but below that, there are the actual budget requests. So base, operating impacts of capital, service level, infrastructure. We also had the menu papers here instead of in the book themselves. And then issue papers as well. Sorry, that was reversed. So issue papers providing more detail on some of the budget requests. Discussion papers that were really more forward focused on this. These are emerging things, not for this budget cycle, but just keep this in mind, Council. And then our policies for reference. And so within each one, you can click and obtain the necessary information. There's bookmarks, so you can go right to it. So you don't have to navigate all through the document because they are PDFs. Oh, did you learn something? And so that's there for all the documents. So our question to council is really back to Brad on the poll with regard to this, and then we'll open it again for verbal feedback.
So question 5, were the operating documents easy to find online? Please vote now.
Okay. Further feedback on this item, Councillor Freeman?
The only feedback is what I gave back at the time, which was when I first went and Googled for them, it sent me to City of Kitchener. So off our website. And I know that that's sorted out now, but it's just when we have links like that break, I think we should.
I'll reiterate, if folks ever see that, don't wait till budget day to tell us.
No, I did.
Good.
I told Brandon the same day.
That's excellent. Just as a general note, if you see something that's wonky, say something. Councillor Hammer.
Thank you, through you, Chair Henry. I really liked this section. I found it really helpful when I was looking for different materials. You had it very well organized, and on budget day, I found I was using it quite a bit because it was often hard for me to see the signs, but I could at least pull it up on my computer quite quickly and make it bigger. So keep going with it organized that way. I must admit the policies I didn't use all that much, but the rest of the materials I did. It was good to have them there for reference if we ran into it, but very well done in terms of organization.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Just to echo that the content of these were excellent too. Well laid out, well easy to find, the information that you wanted. I used Control F find as opposed to the bookmarks, but anyways, for next
That's
time.
okay too.
Anyway, they were excellent documents and easy for decision making.
Sort of upgrading from beginner to intermediate Adobe professional suite skills if you're ever building out a resume, Councillor Barnagar.
Through you, Chair Henry. I mean, I found these very easy to find, but that's also partly because I knew what I was looking for. I really liked the fact that we had a link from the homepage that said, this is going on right now. This will take you straight to the page. But for the public, once they got to that page, you had to scroll a fair way down before you had to kind of wade through some stuff first. So I just got a little bit concerned that there may have been some people that got a little bit lost along the way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Other feedback? So, I'll say, and even cycling back to the previous one, I know, Philippa, when you were going through the last one you highlighted, and here's the link right at the top of I know that was my feedback last year, so thank you very much for making it easy for me to find the full operating book link this time. I didn't miss it. That was good. But yeah, no, it's useful to have all of these. But to Councillor Bonagor's point, we knew what we were looking for. We sat here through the presentation and being told definitionally what all of these terms mean. These are the issue papers. This is the menu papers. This is the discussion papers. And we know what those mean. I don't know how we can easily communicate how those are situated to a more lay public. Because they don't necessarily tell you this isn't about this budget. This is stuff that's coming in terms of discussion papers or issue papers. There's some stuff going on. You've already read about what we're doing about it, but here's some more. We know what they mean, but I don't know that that's necessarily accessible to a lay person that hasn't sat through as many hours of fun as we have.
Right, and if I may, you're right. The definition of those were in the actual operating budget book, so you would have had to have seen them there before you click everywhere else, and that may or may not be the case, so yes.
So I don't have solutions for you, but that's... Anyways, I think we're ready to go to capital. Question 6.
Okay, so I'm going to close operating. Capital, so the very first one again is the book itself, which is what this question is about. 6 main sections to the capital budget book. The memo, again, that summarizes kind of key highlights with regard to the 3-year capital budget and the 7-year forecast, so 3 pages long. And then we move on to the actual capital section that starts out with a summary as well, another pie chart, if that appeals to some. And then it goes into the actual budget projects by division and the department and division rather. So this is where last year we had heard there was some confusion about seeing capital projects on multiple lines because there were funding sources. So the funding sources were eliminated in this view, and it's 1 line per project so that it's just a total. Then we have, as I scroll down, making you dizzy, an infrastructure section that refers to the rehabilitation needs. We give a flavor to council of some of the projects that could not be included within this tenure, but it's not a comprehensive list. It's just to give an idea. of what that looks like. Operating impacts of capital, that's something that the last couple budget cycles we've been putting a lot more emphasis on, council understanding what those decisions mean in terms of the domino effects later on. And so there was emphasis in this budget too on providing different categories in terms of committed, actionable, and forecast. So things that happened in the past that are now coming into operating, things that you can decide on now that will affect this term, and then things that are in the future that will affect the future. So all of those things for council to consider during budget, we felt was important to summarize here. So we go into more details. And reserve funds, obviously something we always include in the book so that there's an understanding of where the money's coming from, what the balances look like, etc. And debt. So that is it from a capital book perspective, turning it back to Brad.
So question number 6, was the capital book effective? Please vote now. I'm just looking for one more response. I have 7, so there's maybe one. There we go. Thank you. It's all good. Thanks.
Vote early, vote often. But only once on budget day. Further comments? Comments from council on the capital budget book? Councillor Henry.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. I did say somewhat for this one because I was thinking more in terms of making decisions on budget day and through the process. It was helpful as background information. I do see, though, going forward, using it more as a reference document because it is explaining where we're using it and how we're doing it from the funds. So I think as a go forward document through the rest of this term of council, I can see myself going back to use that and explaining it to people where the money's coming from for things that we've approved.
And can you remind, council, given we made some alterations to timings and funding source and lines, what sort of staff do with that and what the public then sees from any updates to the approved capital budget book rather than what we saw originally?
Yes, in terms of the approved version.
Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor
Yeah.
Henry. Yes, so we are in the process of updating all of the budget documents, and that will happen over the next couple of weeks. So we've got a process in play internally where we're updating our software and reconciling that, posting it to our financial system, and then updating all the actual documents so that it translates into what council approved. So don't be concerned that it says proposed and things like that, or that you're not seeing all the results of what you approved on that day reflected yet. They're coming very soon.
Just hearing that it's a reference document, just referencing that there will be a more up-to-date reference document on what we actually did later. And the website, already the numbers on the landing page have been updated to reflect what council did. The documents just
Correct.
take more work. Councillor Barnagore.
Through you, Chair Henry, just to comment on one of the changes you made, which was to kind of just have one line per
Yes.
project. Just for some feedback, I found it was helpful just to see things very clearly, but it was also a little more difficult because those breakdowns are very important. So when I had residents coming to me with questions about the breakdown of, why does the road cost this much? Then I'd have to send them to the project sheet to show that it was stormwater and everything else that was bundled up to a final price tag for a project. So in some ways it was a lot cleaner to use and a lot easier, but in other ways it brought just a couple of other difficulties. So, I still appreciate the document as it was, but I just wanted to flag that.
Councillor Bodley.
Through you, Chair Henry. I wasn't sure where to bring this up, but I'm going to bring it up here, I guess. I'm not sure exactly where I'm going with this, so I'm just going to verbally roll it out here.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out the best way to inform the public about how the reserve funds are funded. And when you go through the capital booklet, I think it does a really good job of explaining where these how does this road get built from a funding perspective? And to Councillor Bonnegar's point, going through each of the various reserve funds. And then as you go further into the capital budget, it talks about the reserve funds in general and where they're projected to be at the end. But at no point in this document does it talk about how CURF is create, where CURF money comes from, or where capital reserve fund money comes from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I know we go through that at council here on a separate day, but I really feel like that's sort of integral to the budget, particularly the capital budget. So again, I don't really know. I don't have a specific request here necessarily. It's just that if I often found myself talking to residents about a particular capital project, particularly this time around when there was so much emphasis on the infrastructure piece, and I referenced back to this document a number of times to show that the way that funding is listed here, CURF is going to be basically zero at the 10-year. At the 10-year horizon. So we are spending that money, and it is necessary for us to have. But I found that I had to go back frequently to how CURF is funded and where that money comes from. So I don't know if there's a simple way to do that, or maybe it's really not important except for CURF and CRF to explain to residents how those funds are populated. But anyways, just a little bit of feedback on that, I guess.
Thank you.
Other feedback, council? And I'm not going to watch the 3.5-minute video now. I know at the beginning, at the bottom of the budget page, we've got a how city budgets work sort of explainer. And it's still slide in the beginning, shows the words reserve fund, but I don't know if there's something about flows and process that communications and smart people could help us sort of think through, especially as we dig our shovels into the ground a bit more on infrastructure, on how we're sort of tackling that infrastructure piece, and whether there's something. It wouldn't be that dissimilar, other than the names of our reserve funds and maybe our specific funding strategies. It would probably be a very common kind of explainer across a number of municipalities for how we sort of budget that's connected to those, but something to sort of ponder whether there's something to show. See, nothing else. I think I'd just add to the feedback that we'd heard. I think that the summary lines and just one line in the capital budget book makes it a lot cleaner to go through to quickly get a sense of what's going in there. And like the operating budget book, if you want to know what this thing does, you got to go look, because there should be a landing page to tell you a bit more. And if you're so interested in road X that's getting reconstructed, pull up having that sheet is really where you need people to be. And that's why you get the really thick document of all of the and all of the projects, right? And I think that's a good place to walk people through, to sort of show them that we've got the homework done in detail, and show them that we've got that detail behind every single decision we're making. From a process standpoint, I actually like telling people you have to go and there's this extra piece to walk through to show them that we've done our homework. And not everybody funds it the same way, and I think that's what we found through the asset management process and looking at comparators. We know our neighbors just south of Union Street, when they do a full road reconstruction, the tax base doesn't pay for the surface treatment. The utility does, because that's why they're digging up the road. I mean, digging up the road because there's no way you have to redo the 75-year-old sewer underneath the ground unless the road on the top also sucks. But it's among the reasons that their utility rates are a little bit higher. But there's less tax-based pressure to do that kind of work. There's lots of different ways to get at it, and ours is sort of clean, but everybody does it a bit differently. A hand from Councillor Freeman.
Sorry, just one other thing you made me think of when you were talking about the cleanliness of the lines is also the funding source allocations. I think that's a really useful conversation in terms of what is, as you said, in that case funded by utilities, but what's funded by tax base. And that one page that you pointed to me that listed, I think it was like page 15 or something in the book that said, this is the only stuff that's funded through the tax base. That was super helpful.
Thank you.
I think we can move on to the next one. I've lost track of what number we're on. Question +1.
Okay, so the online materials for capital. What we've got below the budget book is some supplementary information, and this is where it might be helpful for council to, for example, rely on this piece, which is capital with funding sources. So this does break down each project into all the specific sources. It doesn't summarize it the way Councillor Freeman you were just speaking of. So that we're happy to take all of that feedback away and see if we can come up with something sort of in the middle. And back to Councillor Bodley too, with regard to the reserve and reserve funds, maybe there's some little short summaries that can be added. We'll take it away. But this appendix here, we didn't want it to be gone forever, but we just removed it from the book itself because it was more detailed in nature. So the book is one line per project, but the information is not lost, and it is there if you want to review it from the perspective of the funding source, so that might be helpful. And then below that, you can see the categories for project sheets, so by department, CAO's office, community services, et cetera, by the respective funding sources, or rather reference lines. And again, you can use Control F, or you can do the bookmarks. So whatever's more suitable for you. So with that, back to Brad. The documents, it's about the county meetings themselves. Back and thinking about those meetings that we just shared with you there on the screen, the pace of them, the amount of duration, the pace like between meetings, that kind of thing. Was that useful for you, for your decision making? Do you have any other feedback for us in making it better and easier in terms of the process? We know it's very, very long, but there is a tremendous amount of work, so we're hoping that the buildup of it is helpful for you, but we're open to hearing what works or what doesn't work.
Through Chair Henry, this one isn't a polling slide, it's just a verbal feedback only question.
Thanks.
It's probably helpful. I'll go around this way, Councillor Beath.
Through you, Chair Henry. Thank you. It was long, and I find it, for me, because it takes me a while to figure this stuff out, even after all these years. But I have to say, I'm really grateful that we do a 3-year budget, because it's worth it to go to spend the time to, stretch it all out as long as it takes, because now, we're good to go for 3 years. And when I was at that conference on the weekend, I've talked to people about, we do a 3-year budget, and people are going, what? How do you do that? How can you do that? And I said, because they're done their budget for this year. Now they're already starting on next year. So anyway, for me, thank you. I think it's great. So.
Councillor Henry.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. I too liked the pace, and particularly the timing from December when the budget is presented in a high-level overview, and then liking that we have each of the commissioners presenting a week at a time. It gives you a chance to ask the questions in between. It spreads it out a little bit rather than having to feel like you've got to go through all of it all at once. So those pieces of it were good for me. There were a few things that we had to do, that appeared we had to do this year because of changes that may be coming up, and specifically the DC charges and having to deal with that. I'm not sure that we would typically have had to do that before. The one question I have, and it's not so much for us, but and it is the timing. I wish there were a way that we could have more public input, that it's not over the holidays, and I don't know how we do that. And I'm sure there are others that may feel that same way, but just to get the input, whether it's raising the awareness earlier on that it's coming, we'll have a few that are interested, but just if we could get more input or let it go a little bit longer, I'm not sure which way would work.
Other feedback, Councillor Bodley.
Excuse me. So this is actually where I was going to bring up the commentary about the reserve funds, and also where I was going to bring up commentary about the efficiencies report that we receive. So I wonder, I know these two things are sort of, they're budget adjacent, I would say, not necessarily specific to the budget, but particularly if we're getting if we're seeing changes to the reserve funds and we're being asked to make changes there, usually we see those sort of a month or so in advance of when the budget is coming forward. And I really feel like at that point in time, I'm not necessarily in budget mode, maybe, as a councillor. And I wonder if it makes more sense for those to be reviewed as part of the budget. Maybe that causes challenges, though, with how the documents are actually coming forward to us. Maybe those need to be done in advance. I'm not sure. And the efficiencies piece as well, too. I would say I don't know if there's a better way for us to highlight those within the budget. I don't know that we necessarily have to have those because we're not really approving anything with those efficiencies. It's more of a report that's coming forward. But I wonder if there's a way for those to be incorporated somehow as part of one of the meetings that we have. But other than that, I really appreciated the pace of the meetings, and I thought the opportunity for us to have business plans and commissioners and directors being able to answer questions individually in advance is really valuable to me.
Thank you.
And I think this year, the difference between this cycle and last cycle on the reserve and reserve fund piece was last cycle we had more substantive changes, and so they came forward for approval on budget release day, but we didn't need to approve them that day, and we waited until the new year. And you had a lot of questions on those, and so we engaged on them deeply. This cycle, they were mostly housekeeping, almost entirely housekeeping amendments, and so when council saw them on budget release day, we approved them on budget release day. So they did come at the same time, but it was just the scale of what was going through. But let me ask you just to probe on the second piece around the efficiencies. One of the tensions on budget release day in the past has been, don't present to us for 2 hours, we just got them, and don't say all the stuff. But what I'm hearing and what I'm interpreting is it would be helpful to provide context about, in some ways, the efficiencies that have gone into this process and previous processes as we frame sort of budget release and we see that. Well, that means a longer budget release day. So there's those two pieces are in tension. So since you've raised that, let me ask, what do you think about that? Do you, in terms of that tension, would you like to push back on it and do a bit more on release? Would you like us to go away and think about having it written down and not talk to it? What do you think?
Put me on the spot here, Councillor Henry.
You raised it.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly see the tension between the amount of time that it's like the fact that it's being done in advance. I guess maybe without going through the entire efficiencies report during budget time, maybe maybe I'd like to see these things highlighted within business plans more in your face. Like these are the efficiencies within each of these departments that we saw. Maybe that needs to be a separate part of the business plan. I don't know. You'll have to give me some more time to think about it myself, I think. But I'm not sure. I think by having them so much in advance of the budget, the efficiencies that everyone in the corporation are striving to find and that are so important for us to when we're looking at things at budget time are a bit lost because we're focusing on the money we're spending, not the money that we've saved. So I'm not sure exactly how to highlight that better within the budget books, but and within the meetings. But
I just wanted to make sure that we could elaborate on that conversation because staff writing it down doesn't answer stuff. So I thought we could get some more color. Is this hot on the point? Then I'll come back to Councillor Bonnegar, who's next on my list, and who can be hot on.
Thank you through you, Chair Henry. Just building on that, where it seemed to fit for me with the efficiencies coming might be with the presentations by the commissioners at that level, keeping it at a higher level. We get it in advance because part of it is the assumptions of how the budget's being built. Then again, just a reminder of these are the efficiencies that we've been able to achieve within community services, within corporate services, within IPPW, maybe one piece, and then if there's more detail later on at the end.
I think there's some ideas for staff to go away with that Council's coming up with, and I think in terms of speaking to a culture of efficiency, and as we work through Lean Six Sigma and the rest and roll that out in the organization, having everybody have to speak to it all the time also shows that it's across the entire city. It's not somebody trying to pull everybody else's water, and that may be useful internal politically as well as everybody jostles around the budget table before it gets to us. Did you have more, Councillor Bonnegar? Yes.
Through you, Chair Henry, this is tangentially, I don't think it's officially the budget meeting dates, but one thing that I found challenging in the overall timing was the requests that come to us before the budget for early releases of funds. I understand why they're necessary, but we're making those decisions without the context of the broader budget. So I don't know how to address that, but that was one difficulty that arose, is that we're making some decisions with all of the context available to us, but we're making other decisions at an earlier point without that broader context of the impact it's going to have in combination with everything else we need to do. So again, I have no solutions, I'm very sorry, but that's just one difficulty that arose.
And if I may ask for clarity there, and Councillor Bonnegar, would this be the early capital approvals? Is there anything else that you're thinking of, just so I have the context too?
Well, it's something that really only came to me today, but it's the ones that immediately spring to mind. Yes, it's the capital budget approvals, like pre-approvals. Right. And I understand again why we need to do it, because work needs to happen and we need to make the requests for tender when we, at the optimal time, and the budget process isn't always the optimal time. So it's probably less a request for a change in timing, and I don't know if there's a way to help us have more context for those decisions.
If I could just add, through you, Chair Henry, to that comment, or something that's giving a rationale on why we have to do it before budget day. And there was one example that we had to approve the week before we were doing the budget, and I was struggling with what difference a week was going to make. When I asked the question, it was a big difference a week was going to make, but that would have been helpful to have that context too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think there may be, we're just looking at how those reports are written, because I know that there's usually details that are provided, and I know from the time that I've spent here, the list of early requests used to be a heck of a lot longer than they are today. So I think there's been diligence on behalf of our CFO and team from saying, if it's not really necessary, it shouldn't be coming ahead of budget for exactly the reasons that you've been mentioning. So there's a lot more internal pushback than there used to be on this process to make sure these things really are necessary, because I think we had some projects in the past that got early approval but then didn't really necessarily move that fast, and so why were they there? So I think there's been some more work done on that. Okay, I think we've gone through the various meeting dates.
Yes. So on the promotional efforts front, there were 13 ads placed in the Chronicle between October and February, just a few examples there. And then online presence. So obviously all of our budget documents were posted to our website on December the 9th. That includes, and I didn't show you this, but I can go back if we have time at the end, but that includes all of the reports as well. So the Reserve and Reserve Fund report as an example, the Development Charge report, they're all in one of those collapsible sections so that people can go back to those repeatedly and not have to be searching around for when they went. So that was the website. And then social media presence. What I wanted to do first was to go to our website, but that's okay. Sorry. Or this link, rather. I'm trying to get on the link, but I can't seem to get on my page. Kevin's going to help me. Thank you, Kevin. Oh, that one doesn't work? Okay. Well, we had a series of tweets. I will describe them to you now. But we had a series of tweets throughout the period, many of them quite visual, and to provide awareness and whatnot. They were also replicated on Facebook. So I think there was 13, perhaps. And on one particular day, there was like 4 extra ones. It was related to capital. And then our own Keshwar also did her part in sharing awareness about the budget as well on Twitter. So that was the promotion, and I turn back to Brad for the polling.
So question 9, was there an effective variety of promotional channels used to reach the public in a timely way? Please vote now.
Council. Councillor Vassic.
Thanks through you, Chair Henry. I was just curious, two things. One, I'm not totally clear how what was done this year was different than last year. So I could use some more clarity on that because it looks like it was pretty similar. So I was curious what was new this year and how you found what you did that was new, what worked, what didn't.
Fair question, Councillor Vassic. I would say that we did do more in terms of the social media outreach, and we tried to borrow a little bit from Councillor Bonagor because she did a very good job. I know I'm sure you all participate, but we did notice that Councillor Bonagor, going through it the first time, tried to educate her constituents on the process itself. So we did try to do more of that. And in regards to the visual roadmap, that's where we focused our efforts on trying to get the word out there, just to hopefully demystify it a little bit so that people were at least willing to go and try to read some things as opposed to feel really overwhelmed by all the material on there. So I'd say the visual roadmap was certainly something that was different that we tried to push. And another thing that I feel we did differently this year was, while we have always promoted surveys and engagement in that regard, we did have a link to the survey in multiple places in various documents. So it wasn't just on our website and on social media. It was within the actual documents that you were opening as well on the website. So that was maybe not as obvious to people, but it was something that we were hoping, like, if we can put this in as many places as possible, someone will eventually stumble on it and maybe take the leap to do it. So that was, I would say, those are the two key things that we did differently.
And there's Ms. Patel has more.
Through your Chair, Henry. So just wanted to reiterate the point with respect to the visual roadmap. So we did tweet that out once again to highlight how you could understand the budget at different levels as to whether you wanted to know it at a macro level or go into more granular detail. So we did tweet that message itself. So that was new this year. And the second point that we had heard from Council last time was do some did you knows. So we had those tweets out too. And again, we were trying to get the message out with respect to efficiencies. The focus was also that the tax rate with respect to the business as usual was coming in at inflation. So we were very cognizant of the message that we were tweeting out, and we were doing it as part of the did you know.
Back to you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of more online presence, which is great. I'd be curious to think about some other more in-person ways that we might be able to engage in the community. I know Councillor Henry and I were at the I'm clearly very tired today. The Parkettes, yeah, and they had a really engaging public consultation where you could get a coffee for engaging with the pictures, and there were tons of students out. So I'm just curious about. So that's great that it's having more of a presence online, but then how can we maybe engage people in person a little bit more? And then the second thought is around how do you loop back with people? So people who contacted various staff. I'm just curious about what the internal staff process is for. You get an email from a resident. So how do you loop back either to say this budget process is complete and here's a summary, for example, do you do that? How would these residents who obviously have an interest in the budget be informed about the next budget? Is there a newsletter, for example, or an email list? And then in terms of newsletters that the city people can subscribe to, is there one where people could subscribe for the budget? Yeah, anyways, so general thoughts, and I'm curious about your thoughts about my thoughts. Yeah.
Lots of thoughts.
Thoughts,
ahead.
okay, thoughts for
And
thoughts.
then if you want to swing to Tony because he's runs all the
Yes.
newsletters, please do.
Do you want to answer anything first, Tony? Okay.
I didn't think so.
Jump
but
in.
Yeah.
So on a number, like all of the advertisements in the Chronicle and in multiple places, they identify myself as the person, email, phone number, if anyone had any questions. I actually, this is in all of the years, I received quite a number of emails and phone calls from residents this year asking budget-related questions. So that was really interesting to see that did seem to, resonate with some people, that they did go and contact me after they saw that information. And so every time I would ask, how did you find me? And most of them were in the Chronicle ads. So that was one piece of it, but certainly there's nothing stopping from a resident from reaching out to any staff. And we just made sure we were communicating with one another, like depending on the type of question, whether it was more operational, financial, that type of thing. The commonality was often, depending on when they were reaching out, is we would make them aware of the survey if they weren't aware of it already, as another method for providing feedback. And in some cases, if the window had closed, we took their information and we're keeping that track of that so that the next time the budget process rolls around, we've indicated that to them, that we would, let them know that, another survey or whatever the engagement process will be at that time may be of interest to them. So we've made note of those people who may not have had an opportunity, but that did reach out. So there's a combination of things. As far as the email list, we don't really have an email list at this point related to budget. Just the newsletters, which are Waterloo Stories and City News. We did post a fair bit of budget information in a couple of cycles of newsletters, but maybe I can defer that to Tony to weigh in on whether there's an opportunity there.
Tony.
Through Chair Henry to Councillor. As Philippa said, we do put it into the Waterloo Stories newsletter, which has a growing subscription rate. There's well over 1,000. I think it's close to 2,000 subscribers now, and we did see an uptick in the number of people that signed up as a result. We think of some of the budget stories, so the views are also higher than they have been. We see that through constant contact. We get the analytics on that. So I think it is improving. It's a slow process, but I think it is an avenue that we'll continue to use.
Thanks, that's great. I mean, I was assuming, I guess, that people would want to have the loop closed or would want to stay in touch just because they had something to say this time, which may not necessarily be true, but it sounds like there's lots of ways that you're trying to stay in touch if they want to. So that's great. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonagor?
Through you, Chair Henry. I mean, everything about the budget can be difficult, but communicating the budget can be really difficult. We've been talking a lot about how Twitter was used and what was placed in the Waterloo Chronicle. I'm just wondering, have we looked at advertising in the Cord Community Edition? Have we looked at using LinkedIn and Instagram? Just, we all know that audiences are fracturing. I'm just curious, have we looked at those and were they discounted for a particular reason? Or is it something that you might be considering as we go forward next time?
I can defer that to Tony.
Okay, through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Bonagor. Our Instagram account is not very active or robust, but that is something certainly we could look at using in the future. LinkedIn is a good suggestion. I would say that it isn't one that we'd considered, but certainly we can look at doing more of that in the future.
Did you have more? No. You looked half like you had more and half like you were wondering why I was looking at you, so I just thought I'd ask. This is communication unless you want to roll that up under any other comments. This is promo channels and communication with the public. So, yeah.
Okay, so while we're talking about promo, like reaching out to the public, I'm just wondering, and I mentioned this at the time, but it was really difficult, the timing of the engagement survey. It was just terrible timing. And it's largely just because that's the timing of our process. But we opened it as the holiday started and we closed it just as everyone was getting ready to get back into daily life. And I find that in January is when the public is really starting to become aware of budgets, because that's when the region is doing theirs. There's discussion of Kitchener's in Cambridge and all that sort of stuff. So it's in the zeitgeist. But unfortunately, just due to the timing of the meetings and getting the packets ready and getting the analysis ready, we ended up having to close it just before possibly the prime engagement opportunity opened up. So I think one thing I'd like to find out for next time, and I don't need an answer now, but is it possible to extend that time frame for engagement so that we can either extend it a little bit later, kind of push it a bit closer to the budget itself, so that people, they're thinking forward, they're thinking of the new year, they're thinking of the spending that's going to happen. Can we kind of grab that just at the end so that we can have a bit more engagement with people? I don't think extending it prior in December is going to help us much, because everyone's just getting ready for the holidays. But that's one thing that I'd really like to find out is can we have a lot, like just an opportunity for engagement that sort of coincides with that prime time.
Okay, and if I may, Tony, were you trying to say something? I was just going to say that we could certainly look into that. I will say from my perspective, and Tony might have a different one, one of the things that we're going to need to be mindful of in our next budget cycle is the new notice for public information. So the fact that we'll be getting reports out a week earlier, that's something that we're already starting to think about with respect to our budget schedule, and in terms of how we'll arrange the schedule so there's enough time in between, say, Capital Day and Budget Day, which is currently a week apart, without necessarily impacting a later budget day, which then will turn into early capital approvals happening that we talked about earlier. So there's sort of this domino effect that can happen when you change your end date to further out into construction season. But knowing and understanding exactly what you're saying in terms of when people are really into budget, that makes a lot of sense as far as it being in the new year, how we can accomplish that and yet get back to council with the outcomes of that engagement process before budget day and not necessarily moving budget day. We'll have to think about how that can work, but I don't think it's an impossibility. Right now I certainly don't have an answer, but I'm open to discussing that with Tony and seeing if we can come up with something.
Just to follow up, is that something that we could also talk to the clerks about? Because I don't know if we could put in the agenda, this will be discussed, but the meat of this survey will be released at a later, I don't know if there's any potential there for saying, like, we'll release the results a bit closer to the budget. So that you don't have to have the results 2 weeks before. Maybe we can just say, I don't know, but if you want to loop the clerks in on that one too, that might be helpful.
Those are internal conversations that they can consider options around, but it's council's procedure bylaw, and council can decide to exempt any darn thing it wants to from its procedure bylaw. So I would say council this cycle requested the information earlier than staff was planning on. Now that kind of timing to have it on the day that was being planned requires the same date as what we pushed it to. So if council is willing to take it later, that opens up more possibility for staff to think of. If council doesn't want to wait till later, then the numbers run past each other, I think is what I can interpret, rather than just we'll think about it. Tony, did you have something more before I go to Councillor Kramer?
Sure. Yeah. Generally speaking, in terms of how people complete surveys and research that's done, they find that the greatest number is done when it's first launched, so within the first 10 days of it being launched. So we could put a greater emphasis on the promotion of it at that point to ensure that people are aware of it. And then there's another spike when it's promoted again. So we could do that in January, to your point.
Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Henry, just to follow up on Councillor Bonagor's comments, one of my challenges too with regard to the survey and other communications was that I hadn't had a chance to digest the materials yet. So when people did email me, I was I'm thankful that I could forward some of those emails on to you, because as you'll recall, I have some constituents who have some pretty detailed questions. And, you know, I spent a lot of my holiday time starting to delve into the budget, and then the weeks thereafter, and then prepping for each of those meetings around the budget plans. And I just felt completely incapable of responding to those kinds of detailed questions until really probably the week before budget day.
And I'd say that everybody can have their own process, but I mean, I think for Ms. Reynolds and others, it's staff's proposed budget until it's council's approved budget. And so defending a budget that you've only just seen proposals of in the first 24, 48, 72, whatever it is, it's not ours yet until we've approved it. So I never feel bad about swinging to staff. You want to know why this is proposed, go to the folks proposing it, and I'm happy to connect you to get a good detailed response. If you want to know why I voted for or against something, I've got to do that first. And I haven't thought about it fully until I've thought about everything and then put that in context. So thank you for the feedback. I'll be considering that, or maybe lighter wording depending on what the thought is that they'd like me to consider. It is a perfectly appropriate response in my mind in the early days of those, and not trying to defend something that has only been proposed to me that I haven't digested. So that's what staff are there, and that's what we pay them for, to answer our questions and more.
Yes, through you, Councillor Henry, to Councillor Freeman. Agreed. Please feel free. That's why we're here, is engage us in answering those questions from a factual perspective, particularly in those first few weeks where you're yourself trying to understand what's happening. So please feel free to route staff into that conversation. We're happy to assist there with resident questions.
And Councillor Bodley.
Thank you. Through your chair, Henry. So I guess from an engaging the public perspective, I almost see like sort of two sides to it. There's the stuff that Councillor Freeman's talking about, where residents have dove into the budget and they have a very specific question about some of the things that are being proposed. But then the second sort of thing that I had dealt with was, why isn't, so her questions are more, why is this in the budget? And the other questions are, why isn't this in the budget? Why can't we do X or Y or Z? And I often found, or I felt that at that point in time, maybe it's too late. The budget has been put forward, and the idea that we're going to drastically alter the budget to include X, Y, or Z is maybe not feasible. And so I wonder, from an engagement perspective, we seem to get a lot of engagement on the strategic plan, which is maybe a bit higher level and not sort of in the weeds of, these are the specific things that we would like to do from a budget perspective, but these are the goals that we would like to achieve and priorities we'd like to set for the city. I wonder if there's a piece in between the strategic plan completion and the budget release where we go out to the public and say, this is the City of Waterloo's strategic plan. What are some of the tactical things that you would like to see as a resident, that you would like to see within the budget to help us achieve the goals of our strategic plan, where residents might feel more connected in building the budget almost, as opposed to responding to the budget? I don't know if others feel the same way or not, but that's sort of a transitional piece that I think I struggled with.
Not seeing any takers. Okay. So that's all I've got on question 9. Question 10 is anything else. So continue. Anything else anybody wants to say about the budget that has not been structured by finance staff? No. Councillor Hamner does.
I just have one thing. Thank you, through you, Chair Henry, and it's more personal preferences. I found the presentations by the commissioners very good. I would have appreciated having those in advance. I like to write my questions on as I'm going through and understand where they're highlighting. So it's a picky point. It's great to have them for the public to see after. I just think it would be helpful for us up front.
And Councillor Vasek has a question 10.
Maybe a question, maybe a comment. Through you, Councillor Henry. Because we had so many staff positions come for a request this time, that I think what could have been helpful, and if lots of staff positions happen in the future, is a little bit about why an internal staff person versus a consultant. When is it best to have someone who would be here more consistently? When would it be best to have someone from the industry come in for something shorter term? And what are the cost savings for having someone internal versus someone external for certain things? Because I think that's some of the stuff that I learned a little bit during this process about that there are many positions and many roles that require someone to have that kind of stable knowledge. And then there are others that if you had someone on, so for example, a law position, right? It's much more expensive to have somebody consult on law matters than it is to have somebody internally, for example. But then for some construction projects, sometimes it's better to have it sounds like a project manager for externally for a specific project, because we don't necessarily need that specific kind of expertise on a long-term basis. So if you hire someone with that kind of specific expertise, then the salaries are going to really skyrocket. So just a bit of more background information on that, maybe in a budget and brief, for example, or in, I don't know, operating, who knows where you put it. It doesn't matter, but I think that would be helpful.
Thank you.
And anything else from anyone else? Seeing none, thank you both for leading us through this. We had a very efficient budget day, and now we've had the opportunity to talk about it for another 75 minutes. So I think that's proportional to the work that we certainly did through this budget realm. So thank you very much, and I appreciate as well, just looking back, all of the changes that staff did make, bringing us into the 3-year budget process based on the feedback we'd given. It was extensive and it made a difference. So really appreciate that work, and glad that you're continuing to engage for whatever the next council's budget cycle is going to look like. So next up, we have a consent motion. Anybody want to take anything separately? Seeing nobody doing that, I'll look for Councillor Veith to move it and Councillor Freeman to second it. All those in favor? That's carried. And I'll just note a thanks to the Cash Grants Committee for their work on the community's behalf. Not easy decisions, but very important work. So now we have the Culture Plan Implementation Report Card 2019. Aaron, is there when you're ready?
Oh, this is very high. Not please.
Thank you for the opportunity to present highlights from the 2019 Culture Plan implementation. The arts and culture sector of economic development has been reporting and collecting this data since 2015 in the form of a report card. As a strategy to report to the community about the Culture Plan. The 6 goals have a total of 37 recommendations, and recommendations are led by departments across the corporation. While Arts and Culture guides the implementation and leads 22, a significant number of the achievements are the direct result of collaboration and interdepartmental work. 78% of our recommendations are currently completed or ongoing. Several recommendations that were unfunded in 2019 have now been funded through the 2020-2022 budget process. These recommendations include 2.1, digitalize the city's heritage collections to provide online access, 4.1, develop a diversity strategy, and 4.5, investigate opportunities to expand the city's fee assistance leisure access program for access to a broader range of cultural activities. Goal 1 is to uncover and build community capacity for creativity, expression, and cultural engagement. This is done by investing in culture and nurturing capacity for authentic cultural expression. A more robust artist roster was launched in 2019. The new roster allows artists to more easily update personal information and includes a comprehensive classification system to allow for better data analysis. The number of registrants decreased during the transition phase from one system to another. However, it is anticipated that this number will increase throughout 2020. The city uses this information from the artist roster as a benchmark for how many artists are living and working in Waterloo, which helps us to better find ways to support sustainable creative activities in Waterloo. To provide an update, we are currently at 198 members since the time I documented the number for the report card. In 2019, we offered 2 mentorship programs at the Visitor and Heritage Information Center. Author Afternoons provided local authors space free of charge to host workshops, talks, and lectures. The program was promoted through Waterloo Public Library's Writers Program. 17 authors participated between June and September, and many authors mentioned in follow-up surveys that they were able to make sales during these events. The Emerging Artists Gallery program also provided free space, mentorship support, and promotion for local artists. We hosted 4 exhibits in 2019, including the Mary Allen Studio Tour, Luke and August Swinson, Amanda Garby, and Trevor Warchin. And I'm sorry if I've said that last name wrong. We offered 6 capacity building opportunities this year in partnership with local organizations. These opportunities had a smaller targeted audience than some of the large-scale events hosted in 2018, such as the Arts Funding Forum and Heritage Day. As a result, we saw a drop in the attendance of capacity building opportunities. Capacity building programs are offered in response to community needs and vary from year to year. Goal 2 focuses on strengthening the community's cultural heritage by uniting Waterloo's past and its present. Highlights for the museum and built heritage strategies are led and reported on by other divisions in the corporation. In 2019, 27 places were added to the city's inventory of significant cultural heritage landscapes. And I'm not going to go into the museums too much because you heard a little bit about it last week, but some are the 10th anniversary of museum operations at Conestoga Mall, the 100th anniversary of the Pierce Aero truck, which was on display in Buffalo from April till July. And in August, the City of Waterloo Museum partnered with Woodbine Racetrack to commemorate the 116th running of the Seagram Cup. Goal 3 focuses on enlivening streets, neighborhoods, public and green spaces. It provides opportunities for people to gather together in public spaces and participate in shared experiences. The number of public square bookings continued to increase in 2019. It was booked 52 times, up from 46 bookings in the previous year. With the ION official launch in the summer of 2019, the square is still a desirable place for people to gather together and is an easily accessible site. These bookings are all external and do not include the number of times the City of Waterloo programmed the square. Exploring potential new spaces to animate was a priority over the summer. In support of recommendations in the Uptown Public Realm strategy, pop-up programs occurred in Heritage Green and Barrel Yard. These pop-ups provided valuable information into the demographics of the area and provided information about the types of activities that could be successful in the future there. The Arts and Culture team continued to explore strategies for passive animation of spaces in Uptown Waterloo. A new giant game was added, Guess Who? In order to create this game, Snap Happy set up in Waterloo Public Square to take photos of residents who showed up. Residents can play Guess Who and share in the experience of finding themselves reflected in the game, literally. The use of murals as a tool for passive animation was also expanded. In addition to the annual National Indigenous Peoples Day mural in the square, 4 murals were commissioned and installed along Willis Way on the parkade. To animate spaces beyond Uptown Waterloo, each year our Artist in Residence program takes place in a different location in Waterloo. In 2019, Paul McDonald used Veterans Green in the Northdale neighborhood. Through street art, Paul worked with community residents and stakeholders to engage the community in a conversation about the changing landscape, create connectivity and interaction between residents, educational institutions, and the community at large. Goal 4 is to enhance engagement of community diversity to build a stronger shared sense of belonging. Each year, we continue to have an increase in inquiries at the Visitor and Visitor and Heritage Information Center. To maximize the use of this space as a hub for cultural creativity, programming was increased in 2019. City-led program include the commissioned painted piano by local Indigenous artist Luke Swinson, capacity building opportunities like Author Afternoon and the Emerging Artists exhibitions, and engaging drop-in programs created by the Visitor and Heritage Center staff. The center also hosted programs led by local organizations like the Waterloo Public Library, Pat the Dog Theatre Company, and Arts Build Ontario. In 2019, we continued to create and nurture relationships with the Indigenous community by increasing opportunities. We also continue to see an increase in the number of city-delivered events, programs, and partnerships. The number of programs increased from 106 from 91 in the previous year, and attendance at city-delivered events and culture programs increased from 26,392 to 47,438. New programs such as True North and Soap Opera, which told the historically inaccurate story of Joseph Seagram, were introduced to target new demographics. And existing programs like Lumen, which attracted 15,000 visitors in 2019, were expanded. Goal 5 is to expand community awareness and appreciation of culture. In 2019, we saw 31 pieces of earned media coverage, including stories in the Community Edition, The Record, CTV News, and CBC. We also had earned media from Guelph Mercury regarding Lumen. Overall, media coverage declined slightly in 2019 despite an increased number of media releases being distributed. The decrease in coverage of arts and culture stories by local media is a trend being reported by artists and arts organizations throughout the region. The number of film permits increased in 2019, as did the scope and scale of productions. For example, The Amazing Race Canada, a national television show filmed in Waterloo and surrounding areas. An increase in awareness can also be seen in requests from outside organizations for City of Waterloo staff to share their expertise. Staff were asked to speak at conferences like the Ontario Museum Association, at the University of Waterloo, Wilfrid Laurier University, and Perth County. Social media continues to be a tool to reach a broad audience, and in 2019, we continued to have an increase in social media engagements. Not only were we reaching a broader audience in the region, but interest from international artists about events such as Lumen suggest a growing reach globally. Goal 6 is to foster collaboration in the culture sector. The city is taking strides to strengthen relationships with other municipalities, all levels of government, education, key cultural organizations, community associations, and local business. Arts and culture staff continue to search for opportunities for relationship between organizations not in the culture sector, and that can be seen in a major increase of collaboration partners. I didn't list all the partners on the slide, but they can be found in the report or just on the last page at the bottom. Moving forward into 2020, the City of Waterloo will continue to act as a catalyst for culture, pursuing opportunities to build relationships and partnerships between the culture sector and other sectors in 2020. Priorities for economic development and arts and culture in 2020 include a focus on strategies for municipal funding and support, recommendation 1.3, to expand community capacity for creativity, expression, and cultural engagement, promotion of Waterloo's local cultural assets, recommendation 5.2, and to continue development of relationships and partnerships between the culture sector and other sectors. Implementation of the Waterloo's Culture Plan has been very successful, and many recommendations have been achieved in a shorter time frame than initially anticipated. In addition, the city's new economic development strategy focuses heavily on arts and culture industry development. As a result, staff will begin community consultation in 2020 to inform the next steps of the city's culture planning process, ensuring that our vision for culture remains relevant and effectively supported ongoing growth for Waterloo's culture sector. If you don't follow us already, you can follow us on social media.
Thank you very much, Erin. Appreciate the update. Questions for our culture team from council or comments? Councillor Bonnegar.
Through you, Chair Henry, thank you for the update. I really can't thank your team enough for everything that you are bringing to the city. I had one question and one comment, really. So the first is the question. So the artist roster that you mentioned, now it helps you benchmark artists in Waterloo, but from what I understand, anyone can apply, even artists from outside Waterloo. So for that benchmarking reference, do you just separate it by municipality? Like can you give us an idea of what you're seeing locally and how much uptake you're seeing from Waterloo artists and from artists outside the city as well?
Through you, Chair Henry, the artist roster does allow us to sort artists by location, so we can pull out that information about how many of those artists are local. It's also a really valuable tool for our team to distribute information. So all of our calls for artists, for example, go out through the artist roster, which is why we encourage a broader participation than just local artists. But it will provide us, as it becomes more heavily populated, with some really good data about who's actually in Waterloo and who's working in that sector.
Okay, I look forward to seeing that as it comes forward. Thank you. And the other one, I just wanted to really commend you for the work you're doing when it comes to mentorship and partnerships. I think we can all agree that city-delivered events are fantastic pieces of community building. I can't say enough how much I love Lumen and the other things that are happening, particularly in Ward 7. But I think that the work you're doing, working in the background to enable other arts groups and other artists to flourish, is possibly even more important. And I think it might have a longer impact. So I was so glad to see the mentorship and the partnerships and the work that the city's team is doing to kind of help underpin and support community-led initiatives. It's really valuable, and I just want to say that I deeply appreciate it, and I know that there are arts groups in the community that do as well.
Councillor Veith.
Through you, Chair Henry, thank you for the report. It's great. And I just want to make a comment about the recommendations, the second one, that council continue to champion local cultural development. I think that's great. So thank you for that call to action.
Seeing nothing further, I'm hearing Councillor Veith moving that recommendation, probably also part one, right? You'll get the information and then champion the heck out of it. Okay. Seconded by Councillor Bonagor. Any further comments or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much. Next, we have just a report, collaborative municipal funding for key cultural institutions, a summary from 2019-20 from Sarah, who's available for any questions that council may have. Question from Councillor Bonagor.
Through you, Chair Henry, I was just wondering if staff could explain if or how any of the report's recommendations have been implemented or brought into consideration already.
So through you, Chair Henry, the key recommendation that has been implemented is the development and execution of a conditional funding agreement with the museum. So that agreement has now been signed, and the 2020 funds have been released. So staff from all three funding municipalities will be meeting with the museum representatives in October to review their 2020 year end, which happens in June, to assess whether or not they've met the targets that have been outlined in the conditional funding agreement.
Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you, Chair Henry. Through you, Estero, can you just comment a little bit, if you can, on the board's involvement or the board's engagement specifically with the museum? And I recognize what's before us today is directing staff to do a comprehensive review of the four, but I think we all agree that this is a pretty critical part, the museum itself being on the right footing. So I'm curious about the board engagement.
So the museum board was involved with the consultant throughout the process. The consultant did provide her final report directly to the board for feedback. And then subsequently in December, we held a meeting with mayors of all three funding municipalities, CAOs of all three funding municipalities, and economic development staff, as well as staff and the board. executive of the museum to review the recommendations and review the municipal recommendations on next steps. So those recommendations were accepted by the board. And I think the fact that the museum has now signed that conditional funding agreement is a reflection of the board's commitment to helping that organization become more sustainable.
Thank you, and we will get us on updates on how they're doing.
Annually, if staff determine that those initial conditions haven't been met in 2020, a report will come forward to council. One of the things that all of the funding municipalities were in agreement on was if those conditions aren't met, municipalities will have the option of either reducing or withdrawing funding for subsequent years of the agreement. So if there are concerns, we will bring a report forward this fall prior to release of the 2021 fund.
Just further to that, I'm wondering if we should give some consideration to, regardless of what they've moved forward with, and that there be an update report. So I would certainly like to request that. There's no point going well into the fiscal year and there not being movement on the needle, so to speak.
Through you, Chair Henry, we can certainly provide an annual report to council on the progress of that agreement.
Councillor Vasic.
Through you, Councillor Henry. I think I'd just like to say thank you for the work you're doing here and the financial stewardship, because I know, at the very least from my involvement on the KWAG Board of Directors, because I'm on council, and I know Clay and Glass had to do it previously, and I don't know about KW, about the Symphony, but galleries across the province are having to demonstrate that they have deficit reduction plans and that they are actively working towards those. And so expectations on all of our key cultural institutions should be the same. And so I appreciate that you're making that more fair locally, and that you're making sure that that is also matching what the rest of the province is doing. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, I'll look for a mover of the recommendations. Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Vasic. Maybe that includes 3, and that staff be directed to report back annually on the status of the museum's, whatever the necessary wording is that Estero can make sure Olga has. Okay. Call the vote. All those in favor? That's carried. Next up, we have Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover. Councillor Bodley, seconded by Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? That's carried. Item D, request for exemption pursuant to Section 45, Sub 1.4 of the Planning Act for 651 Colby Drive. Staff are available to answer any questions council may have. Looking for questions. Seeing no questions, moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Mayor Jaworski. Any comments, council? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's carried. That's nearly 2 billable hours for Mr. Shields. Item E, award of tender RFT 19-19, Roosevelt Avenue reconstruction. Staff are available to answer any questions. Any questions, council? Mayor Jaworski moves the motion, seconded by Councillor Bodley. Seeing no comments on that, all those in favor? That's carried. And finally, we have the very exciting Microsoft Enterprise Licensing Agreement. Staff are available to respond to any questions from council. No questions about Brampton in general, other than this particular contract that we're piggybacking on. Seeing none, by Councillor Freeman, seconded by all those in favor. That's carried. With that, we'll see everybody back at 6:30.